Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Barber from Targa Communications in the UK. I want to welcome you all to this Targa Communications and REFIRE Investing in Germany online roundtable regarding the future of urban working and living. As our regular attendees will know, my German language skills are almost non-existent, so I apologise in advance for any pronunciation errors. In recent years, there have been social and economic changes in towns and cities across the world, with the growth in the expectations of individuals and businesses for on-demand goods and services. In turn, the real estate markets have adapted to this cultural shift with the provision of purpose-built properties that are suitable for student accommodation, apart hotels, flex-workspace, self-storage solutions, pop-up shops, restaurants, cafes, and other leisure facilities. The operators and occupiers of these buildings and facilities are all looking to provide users with short-term, flexible and agile property concepts that can be enjoyed by the individuals, businesses and entrepreneurs on an as and when basis. Is this a passing trend, or is this the future of urban working and living? The pandemic has certainly shown that this segment of the market is not immune to external influences. So what are the prospects for short-term property solutions for occupiers in Germany and further afield? And what are the opportunities for property investors? These are questions we hope to answer in the next hour or so, and we have assembled a panel of experts to discuss the topic. Joining us shortly will be Andreas Friedrich, the Managing Director, Asset and Portfolio Management at Domicile Real Estate Group; Martin Henke, Managing Director of Tayloe Property Services; Gary McCluskey, who is the Managing Director of Global Design Greystar; and Julia Momachuk, who is Head of Rented Residential at Bonnard. To set the scene, we have a short presentation concerning this increasingly important sector of the market, and are now joined by Mark Holtz, Group Head of Research Core Estate at Core Estate Capital. Once again, today's panel will be expertly moderated by Charles Kington, who is the publisher and managing editor of REFIRE magazine, the leading source of information on German real estate finance for institutional and international investors in the English language. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all our panelists and speakers. So to get us started, I would now like to hand over to Mark Holtz, Head of Research at Core Estate Capital Group, to provide us with a brief overview of the market. Mark.
Andrew, thank you very much for the introduction, and good evening to everybody who dialed in for this interesting panel. Let's jump right into these slides. I have prepared a couple of, let's say, thoughts and ideas on the topic to just prepare the discussion for some food for further discussion. I wanted to kick off with a quick look at why cities thrive. Why are cities so attractive for businesses and for people? And basically, over the last couple of hundreds of years, or even thousands of years, cities have been hugely successful because they're highly efficient when it comes to various aspects of living and working. And that's commerce and innovation, that's knowledge and communication, that's arts and culture. And two main reasons for this are that cities and urban agglomerations are very dense and diversified structures, and that is propelling each of these indicators. And looking at some numbers is actually quite stunning. For these countries, Germany, France, the UK, and the Netherlands, I have looked at the economic output and the population of the large metropolises compared to the rest of the country. So what percentage of the economic output is generated by the biggest cities? And in France, for example, Paris alone is responsible for 31% of the economic activity, but houses only 18.3% of the population. So it's much more productive than the rest of the country. And that's true for both, for productivity and for growth. And it's even more relevant when you're looking at our sector, at the real estate industry, at the investment realm. That is what I'm highlighting here. The gray areas indicate the share of the transaction volume that is generated by the large metropolises. So in Germany, the top 4 cities generate 56% of the entire transaction volume in the country. In France, Paris alone is responsible for 78% of the transaction volume. In the UK, London is responsible for 53%. And same is true for the Netherlands, with Amsterdam and Rotterdam clearly leading this. So cities and urban locations are hugely important in terms of economics, in terms of structure, culture, but also in terms of our business, in terms of the real estate industry. Now, let's have a cut here and look at what that actually means in terms of living and working. What has changed over the last couple of years in terms of living and working? And as you know, and you have mentioned, Andrew, we are in the middle of a huge socio-structural change process right now. It's probably similar to the phase of the industrialization or similar to the implementation of computers in the 70s or 80s. And this is impacting our everyday life, how we work and how we live. So in terms of working, in very general terms, our work is becoming more digital. We all know that. Our work is becoming more flexible in terms of when we work, what kind of work we do, and especially where we do the work. Our work is generally becoming more fulfilling. That means employers are looking for jobs that satisfy their requirements, exceeding just a large paycheck. And work is becoming more demanding. And that actually goes in two ways. First of all, the employee is becoming more demanding against the employer in terms of services provided, in terms of flexibility, and these kind of things. At the same time, the jobs themselves become more demanding as well. Because if you're working in a less demanding job, it is probably easier that smart software and AI might be automating you. So the job market in general is becoming more demanding and more challenging the further we improve in terms of technological advance. And in terms of living, there's also a lot of things going on right now. The Zukunftsinstitut, a German think tank, has identified living in urban areas as one of the megatrends of the time. And because of COVID, they've identified a new trend, which they've called glocalization. So it's global. That means we are thinking and acting global, but our physical, what we're doing physically, it's more centered around our more local environment. So a refocusing to the local. Then we do live more sustainable. Community, services, amenity play a huge role. And I think what is most important here is that where we live does not necessarily have to be where we work anymore. That is certainly only true for a certain cohort of the population. Not everybody has the freedom to live somewhere else than you work, but it is an increasing part of the population that is freer to live where they want. And I think for both, for working and for living, is true that both of these fields become a matter of choice. And because of that, I think that those offices will be most successful where employees and companies actually want to be. And I think those cities will be most successful where people actually want to live. So it's a matter of choice. I think that's something that's going to accompany us in the industry for the next couple of years. So how do you make sure that your offices and your residential properties fulfill these new trends? Let's have a look at offices first. I will not go through every detail in here on this slide, but I think that there are three main pillars that make offices attractive for users and also attractive for investors as an investment case. And if you look at modern office occupiers, what do they want in terms of the asset level? That is the first pillar. The others are the location and the service. Looking at the asset level, the layout first. Modern office users want like large communal spaces where you can meet and greet people, large communal spaces. They also want smaller, like think tanky environments, like these cable cars, which are actually not from one weird small company that is out of a Google office. Modern companies still want very dense and very efficient like workstation places. And they also want these kind of very representative conference rooms. and modern operators, modern occupiers want all of these things in one office, in one physical space, ideally. And to be able to deliver something like this, and also to deliver what the occupier might want in the future, the key thing office is that it is flexible in terms of the layout. Flexibility is one of the key elements to have a future-proof office. You need to be able to deliver top-notch digital infrastructure, and also you need to have a very, very sound ESG strategy. That is a given in these days. That is not a nice to have anymore. That is you just simply need to have a proper ESG in place. So that's the asset level. What do occupiers want from the locational level? I've listed these down here. That's mobility, that's prestige, urban feel, sustainability, health and safety, communication, and costs. And you will find all of these, but costs, in the central location of the larger cities, in the urban location of the large cities. You will find some of these aspects in decentral and more peripheral locations, but we believe that the combination of all of these will grant more central and urban offices to remain attractive for office users and future-proof by definition as they attract demand also in the future. And lastly, the service level, which I've put down here, that has been hugely amplified by the growth of the more recent co-working operators, service office operators. They have put a new level of service and flexibility into the market that some occupiers have gotten used to. And I believe because of that, the situation of the classic landlord occupier relationship will change step by step towards space as a service concept. So that's the office realm. Let's have a look at living. Also here, a lot is going on. And most of this is driven by the young professionals, and let's say the wannabe young professionals, and the lifestyle that they're embracing. As I said before, working has become much more flexible in terms of the location. It's very project related, and projects can happen anywhere. Maybe it's in Vienna, maybe it's in Barcelona, maybe it's in Berlin. And there are a lot of people out there who actually embrace this lifestyle and are looking for an adventure, want to get to know another city, want to get to know another country. So they're embracing this. And that's what you typically call the digital nomads. It's a very mobile generation that we're looking at. And there are new concepts of living outside the very classic residential, like micro-living, like co-living, like service apartments, that perfectly tailor towards this kind of cohort of this very mobile generation. Then, of course, you've got student housing. I mentioned earlier that there's a process, an increased process of automation going on, even in the office realm. And I believe the higher your education is, the more relevant you will stay in the job market. And because job markets will become increasingly challenging, I strongly believe that demand for universities will ever grow. And with demand for universities will demand for student housing. And then probably the last point on this slide, the empty nesters. Looking at demographics, there's a huge cohort of baby boomers growing older. Their kids have moved out of the house, and the parents remaining back are sitting in a way too large house for them. So what's typically happening, or often happening, not typically, is that they're selling the house and looking for a different way to live, thinking about moving somewhere where it is nice. So again, it's a matter of choice. Where do they want to live? And there's huge opportunities in all sorts of senior living concepts there. And on top, I think, of these new concepts, you have other trends going on at the same time. That's still an ongoing urbanization. That's a more recent trend of suburbanization, which was propelled a little bit by the COVID situation. People want a garden, they want green space, they want bigger houses. So some are moving actually out of the cities, and that is causing a lot of domestic migration. People are moving from here to there and moving everywhere. And that is to some extent also causing something that we are calling Schwarmstädte in German. Good luck with that, Andrew. that means if a cohort like influencers or whatever is moving into a certain cities, there's other people, a lot of other people following them. That's very early Berlin, that's Leipzig, that's Dresden, or at the moment that's going on in Rostock or the Rhine-Ruhr area, the Ruhrgebiet. So Schwarmstädte is a very interesting concept of certain cohort moving into a city and other cohorts are following them and creating a buzz in the city. And with this, I actually want to end this session and want to give back to you, Andrew and Charles, and please have a good discussion.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the language, the education there on my German. It's an excellent introduction to today's panel discussion, and I will hand over to Charles Kingston, the editor of REFIRE magazine, to start today's discussion. Charles.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you indeed, Andrew, for the introduction. Thank you, Mark Holtz. I'm Charles Kingston. I'm the publisher and the editor-in-chief of REFIRE, Real Estate Finance Intelligence Report Europe, and we publish in English, with our focus on mainly on the German market for an audience of institutional international investors. I'd like to just say one or two things which occurred to me straight away from Mark's presentation, and in the light of the last week's Glasgow 2-week session to try to solve the world's problems and an assessment of how to deal with climate change. One of the take-home messages from that, I've just been reading a very interesting interview, an article from the mayor of Bristol, who is making a very clear point that the role of cities, that the climate change battle will be won or lost by cities. And the role of the cities will be fundamentally important in all of this. In other words, more so than nations dealing with each other, the way cities now go about trying to collaborate with each other, set up networks of cities to deal with their own issues, will become far more important than how countries actually deal with each other on all of this. With 50% of the world's population already in cities, likely to be 68% by 2050, apparently. 70% of all the energy is being created by cities. 75% of global carbon emissions is coming from cities. So the rise of city governance is certainly something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of over the coming years, something that we can talk about later on. I'd also like to thank Mark. Mark will be coming back in to join us later on when we've got a couple of questions. One of the key things I noticed also in his slides, one of the interesting ones, were the share of the city, the predominant city versus the rest of the country, further serves to strengthen the idea of Germany having the sort of depth in its many cities that other countries do not have. Paris, London dominating, Rotterdam and Amsterdam in Holland, and in Germany, the top 4 cities make up only about the same amount that London does for the UK. Not only that, there's about top 7 cities in Germany and up to about 20, which are all sizable, significant urban centres, which makes Germany unique and offers a lot of investment opportunities for investors looking for depth and diversity within the marketplace. Right, enough from me for the moment. I'd like to just ask perhaps all of our 4 panelists just to, in about a minute, briefly tell our audience who they are, what they do. And maybe I would start with Martin Henke from Talio. Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Martin Henke. I'm working for Talio. We do property management Germany-wide, and with a focus of residential and special residential using in terms of student living and micro living. I'm working in this field since 20 years and can bring experience and can bring experience to the audience in terms of property management and what users are working and how we can operate for the tenants and for our investors.
Excellent. So we've got a property manager here who's able to report from the coalface as to what's happening in terms of change on the ground. Andreas Friedrich from Domizil. Could you tell us briefly who you are, what your company does?
Yes, I'm Andreas Friedrich. I'm working for Domizil since 5 years now. I'm in the real estate industry for more than 25 years altogether. Domicile is an investment manager. We are investing on our own account, but also investing for third parties. We are investing, managing, and also selling for third parties.
Very good. Julia.
Hello, I'm Julia. I represent Bonard. We are a market research and advisory firm. We are a global company with offices and people in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And our data is independent and certified. We don't only use secondary sources, but we also get primary data with the mobile units in the field.
And over to you, Gary McCluskey.
Hi there. I'm Gary McCluskey. I'm the head of design for Greystar. We're a global company in over 15 countries. We manage around 750,000 apartments, and we're completely vertically integrated. So we're investment, development, design, construction, and property management.
Very good. So we've got a good cross-section of diverse expertise here this afternoon, which is very good. In fact, I'd just like to say that perhaps this theme, this subject, the future of urban working and living, is maybe one of the more futuristic subjects that we've dealt with in this monthly series of roundtables from REFIRE and Targa Communications. So I guess we're probably not going to be able to nail down in terms of facts and figures what the future is exactly going to be looking like in 20 to 30 years. But I guess if we can, by discussing various elements of this afternoon, we can get an idea of which way the big players are thinking, what's actually happening on the ground, and what are the key parameters for change in both working and living in urban areas. Perhaps I might start with you, Andreas. As a major investor, you've also invested quite a lot with partners into the German market in the last number of years. Mm-hmm. And perhaps you could just give us a bit of an opening feel as to the way your company is thinking, as to how the change is actually taking place on the ground in cities, in the residential field.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have, when you also look at, there's a survey of the studies, when you look at the the development, for example, of one-person households, in 91 we had 33% of the households were single households. In 2020, now we have about 40% are single households, and in 2040 we have it's prospected to have 45% households, which means it's one of the drivers of the micro living, and this also we have suffered, or the micro living sector has suffered from COVID in the last let's say nearly 2 years now. But on the long run, we think that is a trend that is affecting the micro living sector, for example.
Okay, Gary, COVID hasn't stopped your company putting together a fund, a mega fund of 750 million, with a view to investing in residential across Europe in the coming years. What's the rationale behind that? And before you've even started to spend the money, what trends are you trying to capitalize upon? Yeah,
I suppose, for us, I think, this is a really exciting time. There's such a dynamic happening in the market, and the demand for residential is as strong as it's ever been. Particularly in the German market, where sort of vacancy rates are, less than 1%. And so that's kind of common across a lot of major cities. And so that demand hasn't really faltered. I think what was interesting was the idea of the exodus of the city to the suburbs, which kind of happened through COVID, was probably just an acceleration of the people who would have moved over the next 5 years, naturally have probably accelerated that, which has then created a slight void. But I think that void will very quickly be filled. The other exodus was obviously the service industry because of the hotels, and service sector was very badly hit. And we're kind of seeing that that's, slowly returning. So we're pretty optimistic, and, we're seeing, opportunities in different asset classes, so we're traditionally sort of primarily based around multifamily housing. And, we have a small footprint in the senior living. We've got a big footprint in student housing. And we're now looking at new products that we're bringing to the market, which are urban living, attainable, and single family housing. So, the breadth of the market is changing. And I think we see that as a great opportunity.
Great. Julia, your speciality, your personal speciality, I understand, is also very much the area of residential living, both student, micro living, intergenerational living. What are your initial thoughts about the prospects in all of these fields? Is this likely to be a major growth area, or has the COVID got us all thinking that everyone's either moving to the home office or moving out of the city? What's your view?
Thank you, Charles. Yes, we also as a company are very passionate about rented residential. We've been in the sector for over 12 years now, advising our clients on student housing development. Recently, we looked into senior living. So we believe in this asset classes very much. Actually, the COVID crisis proved once again that we are in the right business, and we picked the right asset class, as it's been resilient to the changes in the market where hotels, like Gary mentioned, were hit much more than all of those in student housing business or co-living. Great.
Okay. Martin, you yourself are also bringing a lot of experience from COVID, from Core State, I should say, from Capera. So you've seen a lot of the changes in this market at first hand. What are your first thoughts about what's going on in the market at the moment?
In my opinion, quarters are the future form of co-living and co-working. Like you combine all this mixed use, in multifamily houses or in new developments, and all the uses getting mixed. Like you can we see in developments we manage from our clients that all the new the projects are like mixed uses, because we all types of these uses they was developed also like in the early 1900s. And we can see, or we can learn from this, that this is a working property, and I think this is also the future of residential use. Yeah.
And just to add, I want to throw in the idea of the 15-minute city. It's not coming from me, but this is the idea that we have a mixed use, that that living, working, supply, medical care, education, recreation, development, space, and so on is reachable within 15 minutes. And I think that's also the idea of the quarter,
yeah,
the district.
Like the boundaries between living and working are becoming more and more blurred. So it's like people working from home or want to find like a cozy space in the office. So it's what Mark said before. So I think this is the future of usings. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mixed.
Of course,
getting mixed in.
There is a lot being talked about quarter development and so on these days, and of course, it takes a lot more than just throwing a few shops and a few doctors' appointments rooms into a neighborhood to make it into a real quarter. And people forget, of course, that 100 years ago, 150 years ago, in a city like Berlin, for example, residential and all of these operational little industries in the backyard, through the Hinterhof, in the back houses, This was all very mixed living, with people living on over the shop, as it were, basically, with all sorts of artisans providing their services. And you can still see the remains of that today in Berlin. However, one of the things that does seem to be a common thread across all of this has to do with the mobility of workers, and presumably younger workers, and this notion of urbanization, that they want to work where it's all attractive to live and to work. And of course, that does raise the question then of where are they all going to live? We're already seeing the tensions in the cities as rents rise. And we're seeing the opposite attempt to keep rents suppressed by cities, and looking for solutions to keep rents down. But in terms, therefore, of short-term living, let's just look at temporary living, where you what's the word I'm looking for?
Service apartment?
Not student. Service apartment is one of it. But you have various forms of micro living. Now, Gary, is that going to be a big part of your big investment in your 750 million investment across Europe? And if so, what are the key criteria that you're looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, it is a major part. I mean, we opened last year our largest urban living product in Amsterdam, called Our Domain Southeast, which is 900 apartments, a lot of which are controlled rent or some form of rent control. That's been incredibly successful. We have lots of amenities on the ground floor that are used all the time, even during the whole COVID period. We've just submitted planning application for a 600-unit urban living scheme in central London. And so we're fully behind that strategy as part of a broader strategy, because I think one of the key things that we're always interested in is the idea of affordability, and urban living provides a level of affordability that other housing can't. And I think there's a higher demand for higher level of service generally in the market. And so, the ability to, rent an apartment that is serviced by a team, has a lot of amenity. You have the opportunity to have events, attend events, meet people. Those are actually quite highly valued above maybe living in a flat share, in one of the suburbs.
But it does mean living in a smaller accommodation than people have traditionally aspired to live in a city.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I mean, we have developed our own product because we felt that, certainly in our student product, we start at units at around 15 square meters and go up to around 25. Which may be fine for a student. Fine
very
for a
small
student.
For a professional or
so we've developed our own product now for the urban living market, which starts at around 22 square meters up to 35. So we've really gone back to first principles and understood, what is someone at that age really for, and then balancing the size of the unit out against the amount of amenity space within the building. So you're generally providing around 3 square meters of amenity space on top of the unit size. So your average unit size is maybe coming in around 25 square meters plus 3 square meters of amenity, where most people will be spending the time.
Julia, when you look at this market, do you also see that it's going to be unsustainable for many people in the cities to be living in the kind of size and comfort that they've been living in the past, and much of it is going to be taken over by this kind of temporary accommodation or small size living for people who may be leaving the town at the weekends, heading away somewhere else? What do you see?
Yes, indeed. I think those preferences have changed with the Generation Z that also Mark was talking about. Now the generation rent is getting older, and they rent everything by day. I mean, also me, from car to a scooter to a bike. So the mobility is the key, but also accommodation. So these small units, if they are efficient, flexible, convenient, a lot of storage space, would not mind them if they are set with those standards that they're expecting, and this would be the future for sure. And it was interesting for us also to see how that student housing and co-living actually paved the way to all this rented resi change now. How exactly points of micro units and flexibility are talked across for single family households as well, and how it started with the new markets.
Many elderly people are living in these cities in apartments, which presumably, once everybody has moved out, have become perhaps far too large for them. What about the notions that people talk about intergenerational living, that there'll be elderly people living together with the younger people all in the same complex? How realistic is all of that?
If it's at me, I think quite realistic. Julia. Yes, quite realistic. Also the concept of community, not just for young people, but for elderly is as well a thing. The loneliness that they're experiencing after losing their partner. Maybe then filled in if they are living with the younger community, with more vibrant one. They don't need to bear those costs of keeping that huge house just for themselves. If they can change it to a rented apartment where they can still cook for themselves, they have their own kitchen, maybe have some events. So for sure, yes.
Yeah, I think it's also here about the mix again. So like older people has the same needs, kind of the same needs like young people, like the millennials, for example. Like 2 days ago, I was reading in the LinkedIn post that like 40% of the millennials feel lonely. And they need some kind, like some community, organized community, like a community space to be to feeling like welcome, to feeling maybe to can attend on functions, stuff like this. And so I think this is like kind of the same, this is the same needs like people have, but it's all about the mix, because we can't just look on millennials and the baby boomers. We also have to see all the people in between, and they growing families, and they need affordable houses. So, and I think this is also like a really important part to develop also like affordable housing in the city centers, in these quarters I was talking about.
Well, Andreas, I mean, you have just made a major investment in 2,500 apartments.
Yes.
In Germany. When you look at what are your main criteria when you're looking at investment now in smaller sized housing?
This was an investment on our own account, and the idea is to optimize it and then to dispose it on the middle run, two thirds via privatization and 1/3 via block sale. It's a classic multifamily house portfolio. It's quite unspectacular.
Unspectacular, yes.
Unspectacular, but with affordable rents. And the average, we have €6.50 per square meter. I would say it's an average concerning location and the quality of the houses, average portfolio, but it's a thing that you can afford, the tenants can afford, and also they are located in locations. It was a now portfolio North, Osten, Westen, East and West, and in locations like Lübeck, Bremen, Hanover. It's also in the East in Dresden and Leipzig, Berlin, Rostock, Weimar, and also some properties in North Rhine-Westphalia. And this, I think, there are quite good micro locations.
But tell me this, Andreas, are you coming up against any difficulties legal or other kind of hindrances thrown at you in terms of converting or looking at different kinds of usage for these apartments?
Yes, you're meaning the so-called Baulandmobilisierungsgesetz.
For example. And
that means that in tight markets, that the cities have the right to approve the declaration of division. And in these tight markets, it makes it more difficult to privatize.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is all of you are saying, yes, the future is micro living, the future is smaller sized apartments. But one of the things we know is that many of these apartments suffer difficulties in getting permits to be built. Now, Gary, this is something obviously I know you have a number of small projects ongoing, but plenty going on in the rest of Europe. How big a problem is this? We all know that the cities are likely to be under pressure for the next coming years, and yet at the same time, there's a major blockage with either conversions of existing properties which could suit, or getting new permits from the city authorities. Is this a big part of your grappling with how to spend all this money that you're going to be spending?
Yeah, no, it's true. And you're finding quite a difference between cities and countries. So the Netherlands are very open to an urban living style product. We're just about to complete a new product in Vienna, which is a mix of student and young professional in the same building. And the government there has been very supportive. In Ireland, the converse is true. They've just banned micro housing. I don't know how long that will last, but they've really pushed back against it. And then we've been working very closely with the government in London, the GLA, to help define a product for urban living or micro housing that is the right kind of product, and not to sort of crush people down into the smallest apartment possible so that the only space they can use is the amenities. Right. And so that's why we came to that balance of if you think about a one-bedroom apartment at 50 square meters that two people are, then it's not unreasonable to assume that a 25 square meter apartment for one person is a reasonable starting point. Okay. And so with those kind of thoughts, we've helped to kind of shape the GLA's policy on what they see will be a wave of sort of urban living product and micro housing. And I think a lot of cities are struggling, with how to control or regulate, that type of housing, or how to give guidance on design. And so I think these are all sort of emerging policies. And I think the problem cities have is that, it moves faster than the regulatory framework. And so it's always sort of catch up. So as developers and investors, we need to sort of, go in and spend time with the cities to actually give them some direction on where we think the market should be heading. Because everything we do is resident driven. It's not someone sitting in an office saying, this is how much space you're going to get. It's, we talk to our residents all the time. And we get feedback, and we base our kind of design approach on that feedback.
Where does Germany fit on this scale of user friendliness, council friendliness, when they're dealing with people like developers like yourself, compared to other European countries?
Yeah, I think we're operating a micro living, urban living product already in Frankfurt, and that's been really well received. And I think we're spending time talking to local municipalities, and we've got quite a few projects in the pipeline. So I would say it's been relatively positive throughout Europe. And as I say, Ireland has, maybe temporarily called a halt to urban micro type apartments.
Julia, does this tie in with your research on European countries? Are there some that are more user-friendly, that are more developer-friendly? I think what Gary's been talking about there is certainly over in Ireland, which has traditionally had a reputation, or it's been a market of ownership. And of course, in the last 5 or 10 years, that's really changed very much, as people are now forced to pay high rents, and the same kind of global investors have been moving in there to buy residential housing, which has caused a certain amount of resentment and has actually caused an extra tax to be imposed on those big developers. What's your research? What does your research show you about which countries are becoming more user friendly to this?
I think that it's more about the level of the market development going hand in hand with that. Developers,
where the need for new housing is greatest, you mean, or?
Yes, and where the supply is more established, and paving the way, those first comers who made the contact with the government, with the city, who showed how the product look and what benefit they will bring. Those markets are leading the way, showing the way those less mature ones how to develop. I think that's what we see in the research the most. And of course, a lot of cultural differences in each of the European countries. They are very specific based on the developments and how those markets came along. We see, I don't know, even for example, about senior living. When we take a look, we recently measured assisted living in Germany and France, and then looked at the UK. And we saw a totally different history of the market, how exactly the UK is to own your senior property is something they take pride on, to have, to give it to their children. While in France and Germany, seniors are more open to renting. They're actually, the renting model is more prominent in the market. So a lot of that is quite specific to a country and its development.
Okay. One side effect of that might be, and we've seen the rise, Martin, of möbliertes Wohnen, furnished accommodation, which has traditionally not been part of the German residential offering. Is this something that's here to stay, or how legitimate is it? Is it what do you see as a property manager?
On the market, I can see, like, if a furnished apartment is not offered as a part of a living concept, they're trying with this kind of concept to go around the Mietpreisbremse, I think, like, in my opinion. So you can like if it's not like in this with community spaces with a program around it, then I think it's just like in existing properties in the big cities, they're trying to escape this regularity. Yeah, is my opinion about, like, only like if you have these existing properties in Germany, then this is a good reason. Yeah,
Andreas, you're smiling at that. It must have struck a chord with you.
No, I
Andreas.
just wanted to add to what Martin has said, and I've read research from the Analysis Institute F&B, and the rent increase for furnished apartments between 2006 and 2020 was 78%, whereas for unfurnished apartments it was lying at 30% in that time period. And now what is interesting also is that the share of furnished apartments has risen from 2015. That was the start of the Mietpreisbremse, from 3% to 18% in 2020.
Okay.
And against this background, the city-states Hamburg and Bremen, they brought in a draft law and required to disclosure separately the rents that are underlying the Mietpreisbremse. This is what Martin has said, and the furnishing surcharge, which means it's a thumb rule that, let's say, 1% of the time value of the furniture can be recharged to the tenants.
I see. Okay. Before we move on, I'd also like to address the question of, it's been mentioned here several times, that the smart cluster cities, and Mark mentioned earlier on the Schwarmstädte. These tend to be also university cities, and therefore are also drawing in a whole pile of new students to come and live them. So let's have a quick look at the market for student accommodation. Now, as I understand it, things have actually, because of the pandemic, things have slowed down, but are beginning to take off again. There seems to be an increasing gulf. Is this an area, Gary, that is part of your remit as well? Will also be to tackle the growing gulf of between the supply and the demand for students? And if so, what are the key drivers behind that?
We have a big student cohort that across Europe, and what we saw was obviously the impact of COVID and the universities going to online last year. Saw a drop in demand, and that is bouncing back pretty quickly. I think there's always a desire, I think, from that generation or that age group, to break away and go and experience life in a different city. So I think, as much as the universities were kind of almost trying to transition to online, I think the demand for, in-person teaching, is now sort of starting to return from the students' perspective and from the professors' perspective. So that's definitely something that we are continuing to grow in all the markets that we're in.
Julia, are Greystar typical in looking at huge upside potential in this segment?
Yes, they are. And online did not take over offline, as people were afraid of. And we see a lot of providers reporting that even when the studies were hybrid or mostly online, students still stayed in residence and actually took their courses online from the dorm room, because they want the experience and they want to be a part of the community. And actually, their parents put off money to go them to study. So they could have put it off for half a year, but then they eventually will go and study. So yes, this is what we see across markets. It's not just for one country where the mode was the different study mode or something. It's quite universal across.
I hear that Germany has been benefiting considerably even before the COVID from Brexit, which means that other foreign students are probably likely to look more favorably at the German student offering. And also because of the fact that the Germans have, although coming quite late to the game, have really beefed up their offering of academic programs in English language, of course, which is all very attractive for foreign students. Is again, I'd ask Domi Seal as a I would say very progressive player in the last couple of years in this market. Is there, apart from micro-living, is there a whole separate section there that you're looking at, Andreas?
We're looking at for the concerning properties that are suitable for privatization for our own account. But we're also for third parties. We're looking at the classic multifamily houses, mainly in the top A locations, the top 7 locations. And also we're looking at looking at forward deals, and we're looking at micro living products.
But do you see the market for student living pretty much limitless with upside potential?
For the future, yes. At the moment, we're suffering because of COVID. We had in the second half of 21, we had a rise. A temporary rise in demand.
What I'm trying to get at, is the main problem a lack of suitable product generally for the marketplace? I mean, would you and Gary and everybody else be buying as much student housing as you could, if you could, or building it in your case, Gary?
No, that's really a problem that we often get offers from developers or from sellers of products in a peripheral position micro living that is in commercial areas nearby a car dealer, something like that. That we get products with too high ideas about pricing. Project developers or sellers that are calculating against the Mietpreisbremse, or they are calculating with 800 euros per unit or something like that, and it's a lack of suitable products that are on the market also.
Yeah, I mean, our strategy has always been, proximity to university or urban core, and that hasn't changed.
In all cities. I mean, also in your North American experience as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the basic strategy. I mean, there are a lot of student houses. There's a lot of student accommodation that's built in peripheral locations that's not ideal, suffers probably more from under occupation. So we tend to kind of, focus mainly on proximity to university and proximity to the urban core. Okay.
This is another area where Germany is likely to trump then, I presume, with so many different cities. Andrew, perhaps I'll just go back to you and say, have we got questions coming in perhaps from the audience who might like to ask some questions beyond the student living, the micro living sector?
Yeah, we've had one from Wolfgang Kotzer. Thank you, Wolfgang. He says, do you seek to let micro apartments using green leases, or are such leases not an element of micro housing at present? I know that there's been lots of discussions here in the UK about green leases for business properties, but I haven't picked up on this on the sort of residential market. Is that something which people are seeing at all?
And we haven't adopted it as yet, but we're constantly kind of reviewing, the whole ESG strategy for our business. So it's probably something that we would probably think about.
Okay. Is that anything that you've seen across the market, Julia, at all?
Just as a very early emerging as well.
Yeah. And Martin, as a property manager, do you see much demand for that kind of
green leases in the micro, like in
green leases? Yeah.
Like not in the residential sector now. Like we have this now as a request or to like from our investors in like commercial properties or for commercial leases, but for residential leases, in particular micro living sector, it's not relevant now, but I think it's coming, and we have to think about it. So we have to show, like for example, from next year, our tenants in the residential sector, how much like energy and water they used, and I think this is like all these ESG strategies. They like we have to include them in our daily business and how we operating properties. Yeah, it's definitely it's coming, and we need budget for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Also had a couple of questions in from Ksenia, one of which is aimed pretty much at you, Gary, actually. It's about the predetermining of profitability of micro-location within cities. And she states that several PRS developers have been unsuccessful, and central locations such as Archway, I'm guessing this is Archway in London, for example, has 250 PRS units sitting empty, she says, and I'd like to hear your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, some operators have struggled, and I think the COVID has had an impact in that sector. As I say, we're developing a slightly different product from a lot of the operators that are out there at the moment, where their unit sizes are between 15 and 18 square meters, and we're aiming at product that's actually much more livable long term. And so we have a slightly different strategy to some of the other operators in the market. So we're not concerned that we'll have a similar kind of outcome.
I've got a question of my own, actually. Something that Martin raised a couple of times about the quarters, and I've just wondered, if you look at a city like Barcelona, which has been designed and built in that way, it's perhaps easier to organize a quarter, but I would guess a lot of cities you're perhaps looking at more local neighborhoods rather than quarters. But if we're all growing into a market where people are expecting on-demand services and on-demand deliveries, how do you see this working out? Because there is going to be a need for...
This is something that they've started to call Q-commerce or something. Isn't that it, Andrew?
Yeah, quick
delivery,
commerce.
Quick delivery,
quick on-demand services, but
within a few minutes of ordering, practically half an hour.
Within a few hours, maybe. But this is going to need the development of last mile logistics hubs and that sort of thing. And I, speaking personally, wouldn't want to be living over an industrial distribution unit or something. Shops are one thing, but having HGV vehicles, even if they're electrified, turning up 24/7 is going to become a little bit irritating, I would think. And I wonder what the view is of the panel as to sort of mixed developments in the sort of style of a quarter to satisfy the demand that we're all going to have for Q-commerce, quick commerce, and pleasant places to live.
Yeah, well, our flagship development in the UK is a project at Greenford, which is a complete master planned community. It contains 2,100 apartments, 100,000 square foot of office space, 100,000 square foot of retail, a new school, a health centre, shopping, and a microbrewery, which is essential, I think, for any community. But we've kind of invested heavily in that to create a new sense of place, and doing developments at that scale have huge advantages to creating sort of a large community and also connecting a disparate community that surrounds it and creating a new heart to that development. And we consciously wanted to add some for sale housing into that development, some discount market rent, some affordable housing, and we probably one of the first people to integrate the discount market rent housing into the general housing with no differentiation between doors. And so that project is really our sort of flagship for this new sort of future community, I think.
Mark, maybe you'd like to comment, given that Core Estate is active in so many different fields, including having been a pioneer as well in the short-term temporary accommodation industry or the student living industry.
And in the city quarter realm as well. We've got 2 funds investing in city quarters.
Exactly.
And I think these concepts are primed to integrate these local distribution hubs because they are so large in scale, like 50, 60,000 square meters, that if you have a clever solution and put them underground, probably the tenant will not even know that it's there. And yes, you do have lorries coming in and they are all electrified, of course, so no noise there. And the distribution itself is happening by bike. So that's okay. It's not too much traffic there. And I think that it's easier if it's master planned on a large scale, like a city quarter concept, like a mixed use concept, than implementing this into an existing building, into a retail store, for example, or something, because that causes more hassle than being an integrated from the start, master planned, holistic concept. So I think city quarters are prime to deliver this 15-minute or even 5-minute city if you want.
Okay.
This delivery services will expand massively, and we need solutions in development for this. Yeah, like in Berlin, it's not just food and like groceries. You also can order Apple AirPods and like a bicycle in 30 minutes as a new player now on the market. And I mean, this is just the beginning. Yeah, I think we need really like spaces for it, and as Mark said, solutions to don't annoy the tenants, the other tenants.
Just a question, Julia, because you're covering a lot of these individual fields, but some of them are more institutionally friendly than others. How easy is it for institutional investors, for example, to access all of these particular segments, like co-living, for example? Is this something that needs to develop further before big money will start to come into it, or are we there already?
It's right. I think in some markets we're there already, but before that, an education had to happen, explaining to the institutional investors the concepts. Now, student housing attracts big money, institutional investors, and it's an understandable, clear concept because it's targeting students. Those targeting students and young professionals for some markets needs to be explained, and investors should understand that those two customer groups live well together. In some markets, it's still a new thing where maybe investor would believe that those two need a separate entrance or something, but doesn't have to. They operate well together. But again, a good track record should show this.
Good. Andrew, I've got my eye on the clock there, and I see that we're at sort of at the end of our allotted time here. If there's any other questions maybe coming in from the audience, perhaps you could.
No other questions in from the audience at the moment, but there was something else was touched on when we were talking about student living and the fact that students were working and studying at home. I just wondered whether across Europe, particularly in Germany, whether you're seeing any developments of the sort of live-work concept, which is sort of going back to working above the shop. And Gary, you'll probably remember this was a big topic about, 10, 15 years ago, which seems to have gone quiet, Gary, in the UK. I don't know whether it's just now assumed that you will be producing that sort of thing, but I wonder after the pandemic, or as we emerge from the pandemic, whether there is an appetite for that kind of work and living combination with a sort of a proper office or a workshop that you can go and live above, whether that's something which people are seeing across the market.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I think we just looked at a scheme, 2 weeks ago, and I suggested to the team that we do some live work units at the ground level. So, I think there's definitely a demand for more workspace in close proximity to where you live. And live work is a good, opportunity to activate ground floor levels and and provide, different type of sort of living experience and working experience. I mean, our amenities, all of our buildings are highly amenitized, and they were all designed to be occupied from 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. at night and on weekends. And so we're quite lucky with the lockdown and pandemic and people working from home, because now the amenities are occupied from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. by people working. So, it's kind of interesting how, those spaces are getting used more than what they were.
Is that something which other people, the other panelists, are seeing across Germany and elsewhere in Europe? Martin, do you see much of that kind of property coming through your door?
So this is, I think I come back with this topic to the quarter, because you have this kind of, but because I believe that people, they with the work-life balance, they also want to stop working and come back home and be home. I think this, I see this in for arts, for art galleries, or maybe for for a handyman who is doing some handiwork. So this is maybe possible, but all the existing buildings, I think there was built in also in the beginning of the 1900s. Like this, so it was combined working and living. In old Berliner, in the ground floor, you was selling your products in the front space in the shop and living in the back. They're all designed like this. Now this kind of spaces are used completely as residential apartments as well, or they reused as because it's possible. It's like a kind of a commercial use to Airbnb. Rented out for Airbnb purposes, but I don't see products they going to be developed in Germany for this? Maybe it's
my take-home message from this discussion is that while certain things are being developed, it's very difficult for us to know what life is truly going to be like in 10 years' time, even as we're speculating on the whole question of home office versus the need for more regular offices. So I think this is a subject we're going to have to come back to again in the future, to look and see how things are panning out a year further on down the line from the pandemic. So I would just like to thank you all very much for having been part of the discussion. Andrew, unless there's something from your end, I'll hand back to you.
Okay.
But thank you all very much for contributing to the discussion, and we'll be all watching how this pans out very carefully over the coming years. Yeah. Andrew, I'll give back to you.
Thank you, Charles. Could I also extend a thanks to our panelists for a very interesting discussion today? Julia Morchuk of Bonnard, Andreas Friedrich of Domicile Real Estate Group, Martin Henke of Talio Property Services, and Gary McCluskey of Greystar. Could I also thank Mark Holtz of Core Estate Capital for his insightful introduction to today's topic, and thank you for coming back to join in the discussion at the end, Mark. Thank you also to everyone in the audience. We look forward to seeing you again on the 8th of December when our next Investing in Germany Roundtable will be looking forward to the prospects of 2022 and asking what will be hot and what will be not. So until then, please stay safe, and I bid you good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.